Hello, I'm James,
Hi, I'm Jimmy,
and welcome to A Job Done Well.
the podcast that helps you improve your performance and enjoyment at work. Afternoon, James.
What we're talking about today, then?
Well, today we have Amanda back as a special guest,
And somebody's going to talk some sense then.
definitely she is going to talk us through a model that really can help when you've got to communicate stuff, when you're delivering change in your team, when you've got to training your team, all of those things that managers have to do every day. Amanda's got a really neat model that she's going to help us with.
So go on then. Why would anybody be interested in that?
Before we get into that, Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself? You've been here many times, but some people may not have met you before.
Hello. Thank you for having me back. Great to be a guest on the show once again. I'm a learning and development consultant. I work independently now, having spent 30 years in corporate world
Surely
as head
not.
of learning and development. Thank you for saying that, James. Well said. Now working independently, helping businesses and individuals with their learning and people development. So it's great to be here and sharing something that I think will be useful to you and your audience. So actually, James, a really good question that you asked, though. Why would anyone be interested in this? So what I think is managers, have a pretty tough job. Every day they're out there leading people. But a huge part of that actually is communication and their efforts to be able to put across ideas, either of their own or maybe represent organizational concepts and ideas that need to be put across. And so they might find themselves in a number of scenarios. They might find themselves in what we call a straight communication scenario, maybe by email or maybe in team meetings. They might find themselves at the head of leading a change, maybe a change conceived by the organization, but in which they play a huge part in terms of people taking people along with that change. Or it could be just generally helping people to understand stuff. Maybe you've got someone new in your organization and you're thinking about induction or the way that we do things around here. Or it could be part of a formal training program. So a number of scenarios in which managers themselves are required to communicate and share information. But for me, the most important part, I think it's true for everyone if you think about it, the most important part of communication is making sure, one, the message lands, i.e. it's understood, it's received by the audience. And the meaning that they take from the message is accessed in the way that you would hope and more significantly drives some kind of action. Otherwise, it was a nice to know communication, which obviously has its place. But very often for managers, I'm telling you this because I need something to happen. So the holy grail that we're pursuing here, if I might use that expression, is around how do I communicate stuff in a way that's easy to access by the receiver and motivating enough to do something, to make some kind of personal change or individual change. Does that resonate with you, first of all?
I think that, to be honest with you, absolutely. And the number of corporate communication calls I've been on where they clearly haven't thought that through at all, it's innumerable. So, yeah, I think there's a lot people can learn from this.
Yeah.
One of the challenges, Amanda, is in all of those scenarios and whenever we're communicating, we tend to get caught up in the content. And does my slide look nice? Is my email phrased? And so we're not thinking about some of the things you're going to talk about. We're just worrying about pretty slides and stuff like that. And I think that doesn't change behaviors, whereas what you're talking about can help.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes, absolutely right. Hours and hours, I would have ventured to guess, spent on crafting PowerPoint presentations just exactly as you described, which again have their place. But what this model does is help me personally. So I'm a kind of a user of this model too, is very, very helpful for helping you to think about, well, a number of dimensions in your communication, not just, is this going to be a PowerPoint exercise? Should we take a look?
That's it.
So the model, we should give full credit and citation to the creator. It's not mine. I wish it was. By a lady called Bernice McCarthy, who is an expert in education, actually. And I would say it's easy to think about Amanda's learning and development person, so she might use this in a training scenario, but actually this is a complete model for communications in whatever form you might come across them. So for your manager audience, think about any communication you're formulating. It could be a PowerPoint, it could be an email, it could be a team meeting. We've talked about that already. And it has 4 key stages. Actually, it's much richer. If audience want to learn a little bit more about it, we should provide them with a link to the model at the end
we
of
can
this
do that.
session. But essentially...
Sorry, Amanda, before we get into the model per se, we should just add, rather than just talk through the model, which could be, you'll do a stunning job, Amanda, but it could be a tad dry. We are going to bring the model to life, as you are going to use a live case study.
A guinea pig.
Of yes.
A live guinea pig.
But in fairness, we should add, he's not only a live guinea pig, but he is wearing a very fetching shirt today.
Do you like that?
He's dressed up for the
That's
event.
my new shirt, that is. My wife bought me them. She bought it from a charity shop last weekend. I kid you not. £12. Can't go wrong, can you? But when you're a retiree like me, you need to watch the pennies.
Thrifty and stylish.
Absolutely.
That's our James.
What's the scenario?
So I am halfway through writing a second book. And I suppose if there is ever a exercise in communication, writing a book is. So given that I'm halfway through, I thought now might be the time to sense check what I'm doing and see if there's any rhyme or reason to it, because it'd be a bit pissy off if we get all the way to the end and you point out all these I should have done. So there is the scenario.
Amazing. Okay, writing your book, congratulations. So we want to hear a bit more about that. So as you are thinking about writing your book, I'm going to suggest you think about the format model for communication. And that has a number of stages. And the first one will be music to your ears. You have both touched on this in many, many of your podcast broadcasts. So the first part of the model is about creating meaning for your readers in this case. So the big question that goes with this stage of the model is why? And what it's actually about is connecting your audience, the learner or the reader in this case, to the materials, having them attend, having them be present to the information you're putting across. Let's experiment with that a little bit, James. Tell us about the why for the book you're creating.
So not the why am I writing, but the why would anybody read is.
That's exactly right, for the audience in this case. So as you're formulating this essentially communication vehicle in the form of a book, you are thinking about the stages that help people to access the material you are trying to communicate to us.
Okay. So the why. So what the why? The book is about... Now, let me go a little bit back a bit. So why am I writing it? Because I know how me frame it so people understand it. Did you ever read In Search of Excellence? So it was a book from the 1980s. Yeah, it was given to me when I was a bright young thing in the 1980s. And I found it on my bookshelf 30 years later. And
Did
I
you
read
not read it?
I did actually. I did read it. I read it 30 years too late because it's a very good book,
Okay.
right? But it's a book. And what they did in this book was they looked at high-performing companies and they said, well, what's common about these companies? And I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. It's a very good book. I recommend it to anyone. But I just thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to see if there is commonality in companies that have really screwed it up? Because, the thing with high-performing companies is that sooner or later the wheel drops off so people can discount what people have learned. But if it's screw up, it's a screw up. There's no avoiding it. So I thought, well, it'll stand the test of time. And also, I'm a bit of a half-empty sort of guy, so I like things which haven't gone tits up. So that was the why am I writing it. But why would anybody want to read that? Well, actually, when you start to look into it, and what I've done is I've got 8 or 9 corporate disasters. And when you start to look at them, the commonality between them is really quite uncanny. So you see the repeating patterns over and over again. And actually, I've seen some of these patterns in places that have actually worked. All right, they didn't absolutely go belly up, but you see these patterns reappearing. So why would I want to read that will be, well, what can I learn from it? Why did these organizations go belly up? And is there anything in it from me that I can do to avoid that happening to me? So that's the why. How does that sound?
Very good. Do you want to read this book, Jimmy?
I'm interested. You can learn from the stuff going wrong, so maybe you don't make those mistakes in your team, in your organization. So yeah, I'm there with that.
Yeah, sounds really cool.
But Amanda, is there anything that James could add to his why that would even strengthen it even further?
So question is, James, have you done any market research, for example, from your audience or your potential audience for your book, and to understand what they want to hear about?
No, have I, Jeff? However, the feedback I got on the first book was that people liked the stories that I'd use to explain points where things had gone wrong. And then from a personal perspective, having worked for 6 or 7 large organizations, I just thought, well, I've seen the same patterns here. And it's a very different organization. So I was quite curious myself. Well, I have to admit that's where it came from. But people like a good disaster. A good disaster movie always goes well. This will be the Titanic of books, this will.
Yeah.
A great point. James has got a strong why, and you'd be compelled to read it. But actually, to make it stronger, understand really what the audience might want or what they might be thinking about this.
Yes. And then in this communication, you're creating from that point of view. You're helping them to connect to the concepts, the ideas, the content, the communication from their point of view in a way that's useful and meaningful to them.
Yeah, and I think, yes, people have to be able to act on it. And there's a point now, and one of the other bits of feedback that I did get from the previous book that I did was each chapter I put a sort of summary which said, well, what can you do with this? So repeating that structure would fit within your model.
Yeah. The beauty of the model is it's about seeking to connect kind of both sides of the brain. So that desire for structure, which you will build into your book as you construct it, of course, and sequential language, chapters, all of that logical stuff. And then the other part is, can you help people to create some emotional shifts? Can they see, as you described, the patterns? So where things went wrong over and over, what's the pattern in that? Or create beautiful metaphors for them so although the example of things going wrong may not be in their industry, for example, it could become a metaphor for how they work and therefore a cautionary tale, something to be avoided. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that relates to, interesting, we did a podcast last week, which was about high performers, and I recounted the tale of Super Chicken. I have to listen to last week's podcast, but somebody actually came back and said, well, that's exactly like every organization I've ever worked in. So actually making it relevant to people's own experience in the organization that they work in is really important from a why perspective.
Yes, I need to hear this, why I need to engage with this communication, relevant to them.
What's the next step in the model then, Amanda?
So the next step, or the key question for the next step, is the what question. So now I understand why. We've created some meaning. I understand why this might be important or interesting for me to know. Then the question becomes what? You're either giving people information, so engaging the part of the brain which is able to receive information, facts, stuff that you're putting across, ideas and concepts, but also asking them to imagine what might be possible. How might you go about solving this problem? So the big question there is what? What is it about? What's the concept?
So the what? So as I said, it's a number of organizations which have been a disaster. So if I choose 2 or 3, the Chernobyl disaster, the post office scandal, the blood transfusion disaster, Bhopal, horrible sex scandal in the States, in the Roman Catholic Church in the States. So it's a wide variety of different organizations. But the what is the things that you see, the repeating patterns.
Nice, thank you.
So Amanda, just on that, so what James said in terms of the what, he's described it, but he's then talking about some disasters that are on the surface. They're very interesting, but they're not really relatable to people's everyday jobs. But he's creating the bridge from the disaster to how it relates to normal everyday organizations and everyday work and everyday lives. And it's that bridge that becomes important in establishing the what for people. Is that right?
Exactly that. It's what now are we talking about? What is this concept? So the story becomes the kind of metaphorical access point. The what becomes the concept or the idea that you're trying to put across. What was the story in service of? What were you trying to illustrate or bring to life in terms of concept?
Okay, so I think there the key point is some of these organisations, it went, dreadfully wrong. But actually, the reasons behind that are common to a huge number of other organisations.
Right.
So actually, these organisations I think a lot of them just got unlucky. The stars lined up, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen to an organisation near you.
Yes. So what do you want them to know now as a consequence of that pattern that you can see that you bring to life through the story? But the bottom line is, what am I supposed to know now? Good. Seems like you might be following this model intuitively through
I
your
don't know.
work.
I think it's going to fall apart shortly, but let's keep going. Let's
get on to the next bit then.
Let's hope it doesn't. And so now, certainly from a training perspective in this case, but actually in all communication scenarios, the key question becomes how.
Yeah, go on then.
For example, let's imagine you had launched some kind of change in your organization. You say things are going to be done differently from X date going forward. Very often, let's say your change has sadly resulted in some kind of downsizing. The question that you very often hear from people is, well, how? How will we now get all of the work done with less people? In the scenario I've described would be a very common question. How will these new policies and practices actually work? So you're moving into the skills area. What will we need to do? Is there some new training? Or is there some new way of behaving in this space? So as you're thinking about your communication, you've covered off meaning. We've explained why it's important. We're into the concept. What's happening here? What ideas are we putting across? And now you're exploring how might this new way of thinking or doing things actually be put into place? What skills will be needed to be able to do it? What's the practices we will need to change? How do we extend beyond thinking about it conceptually into making this a practical reality?
And this is interesting because I haven't started on this bit yet. And there's a question: is this should this be part of the book or not? I think your answer is going to be yes. But you could then stop and you could say, well, you see these repeating patterns, and that's right. And people will recognise that and they'll see in their own organisations because they're endemic. So what you're saying is it's worth pulling out the counter. And so if you want to avoid that, this is what you should be doing. And give examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Or providing provocation for people to actually then do some work on the how themselves. But certainly not missing the step of how we translate this idea, this notion, this example into something, a new practice, a new way of doing things. Yeah. I'm not sure you could necessarily in your book give them all of the answers to that, but you can certainly lead the thinking towards how might you practically apply this in your area.
When you were talking about the how, what I was also thinking about was what James had talked about earlier, which was how he structures the actual book. So, he's got stories, and at the end of each story, he gives a summary. Is that part of the how as well?
So yes, for James it is, for sure. How am I thinking about creating this book? So as I'm writing this, that will be the how of the practice of creating this book, for sure. If you're thinking about the communication for your audience, the readers of the book, then the question becomes, how do I access the information? What skills might I need to apply some of what you're talking about? But the two are interrelated, right? The structure of the book will help me to digest the ideas, for sure.
Yeah. And that's what James had said. He had said that previously his last book was structured in a certain way, and the feedback was that worked really well for it.
Yeah.
So he was thinking about how he communicates the message, in other words, story, summary, that's the structure, and that helps the reader learn more about the subject.
Yes.
Than if he presented it in a different way.
Yes. So the structure of his creation certainly is designed to be able to make it accessible to the reader.
Yeah.
Yes.
But from a communications perspective, it's important to give the how. What should they do differently? How should they avoid this situation?
Yeah. Or certainly pay attention to that. As the creator of this communication, in this case a book, is there some how? As I'm writing this email, is there a message in here that goes from the meaning, the why, into the what we're doing, and then how I'm expecting you to do this? And if there is, how are you building that into that communication? In this case, not an email, a book, but yeah.
Okay, but there have been times when I have been in meetings, for example, where you sit there and you think, well, how am I supposed to respond to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. and therefore they have totally missed the point in that communications exercise.
Yeah. This is bringing awareness to the creator, essentially.
Yeah.
It's good practice for you as the manager trying to put some idea across to think about how you take your audience on the journey to be able to access the information you're creating in a way that's consumable by them. Sometimes we create something that I would say is trainer-centric or facilitator-centric. I wrote it for myself. It's everything I know, and I'm just passing it over to you, as opposed to taking what was it like if I'm a learner here? How can I consume the information that you are trying to impart? And so placing yourself in your case, James, the shoes of your readers to be able to design the information that you're putting across through, in this case, through your book.
And I think that's where certain books and communications fall down, is that they don't lead you to the behavior that they want to see. They just give you the information.
Yes.
Rather than, and how you can apply it, how you can think differently.
Yes. Yes. And as a development specialist, I am concerned with, you might go through this training experience, which was just a lovely day out, unless at the end you're starting to think about how you might do things differently. So for me, as a learning designer, it's always, what do you want your people to be able to do as a consequence? And then the next stage, of course, which would be how you actually apply it.
Yeah.
But I guess the discipline for me is putting yourself as a creator through each of these stages and testing what you're creating against that model to explore the accessibility of it. For managers, how does this get received now by the people in my team, so that they can do something differently, so they can perform better in the job, so they can contribute to the organization.
Can you give us an example of something you've seen where that has been done really well?
So let's talk about innovation and creativity, for example. I've seen brilliant training programs where actually meaning and purpose established by the organization, funnily enough, for the survival of the organization. The what, some teaching around what this actually means in practice. Let's give you an experience of it. And then how, go and do some exercises where you're putting those skills into practice. You're creating, you're innovating in your space, and what were your case studies that you create as a consequence.
But so you talk about training, but actually training doesn't matter, as in, because it could just be a communication, as we said earlier, it could be an email. It's just 100%. The amount of effort you put into it. But if you're not being very clear about what the skills are that people are supposed to use off the back of this.
Yes.
Because if you think all communication is trying to change behavior, then how do you want my behavior to change?
Exactly. How am I going to do this?
Even if that's just paying a bill, frankly.
Yeah. And the problem here is, if you think about the model, you've established the why, so now I'm interested, I'm paying attention. You've told me what you're going to tell me about. If you don't tell me how, then I'm left high and dry, aren't I?
Yes. Incomplete.
Because you've created a sense of urgency. So I wanted to do this, and now you've left me out.
Yeah, but it does. That's interesting, actually. It doesn't matter if it is, I said, a bill, but a book or a training course or a bill, because if it's a bill, they want you to pay, and they're very clear about the how. There's usually a big red box at the bottom with 4 options as to how you can pay this bill.
Give you the options. Yeah.
So therefore, if I want to avoid a corporate disaster, these are the options. These are the things I could do to avoid it. That needs to be spelt out. Yeah, okay, cool. So what's next?
And then we move into the key question being if or what if. What if I'm going to do this in my role? What if I applied these concepts and these skills to my current job or my life? Or so essentially, I'm going to perform something. I'm going to do something, a move to action here. And this very often requires adaptation. So let's say in your book, you're giving examples outside of my industry, but they certainly do bring to life what can go terribly wrong. And you're teaching us a little bit about how to avoid that. What's the skill that I need? Question is now for me, how am I going to apply this? Or if I apply this in my workplace, in my job role, what would that look like? How do I refine it to make it meaningful in my context? Make sense?
So it's interesting that because the questions become overlap. But you start off with why.
Yeah.
What's the meaning of this? Talk about the what, what's the concepts? How, what are the skills? But then the what if is the application of it. So if you use this, what would that look like here?
Yeah. Yeah. Nice question.
But how is
What
that?
would it be like?
How would that play out in a book? I'm thinking of, if you think of some of the classics, like, I don't know, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Managers. How does he do it in that?
Well, it's really interesting because in that particular training, as I experienced, we had a number of sort of supporting or reinforcing mechanisms. So one of the things, for example, which worked brilliantly, was a little buddy system. So after you've been through your training and you're taught all these concepts, then you have a buddy already assigned and you've both been through the training together and you meet up on a regular basis and you take one of the concepts, so one of the habits in the book, let's say start with the end in mind, and you say, okay, how have I been applying that in my work or my home life? And so the reinforcement work becomes around, what did you do? How did you do it? How did it go? What did you learn?
So in this context, Amanda, how does this apply to James and his book?
It's a really good question. So James, in your book now, what are you going to suggest people might think about doing next? What would you encourage them to take from the book and translate into their world?
Yeah, and I think it's about your behaviors as a manager and the things that you could choose to do differently. Yeah.
So you might give them some prompts or some nudges about what to do next. How might you think about this? You might encourage them, as you guys do with the podcast, to give you some feedback, to write to you as the author afterwards and say, how have you applied these concepts? How did you experience and what did you do as a consequence?
But it is worth having a chapter at the end called So What, or something like that, which forces out, well, if you were going to do this, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And for me, this translates into one of the big mistakes that people make around delivering change, whether it's in your team or organizationally, is they don't think about the sustainability of that change. So, it's push it out there, tell somebody the information, jobs are good. And they don't think about how is it going to be sustained over a period of time. So you want to see the benefit of it. You've got to make sure that from the outset, you're designing in the methods, the accountability, the space, the things that make it become real every day.
Yes, the reinforcement mechanisms, essentially. And I don't mean that in a controlly way, but I do mean it in terms of check-in. If this really matters enough, organizationally or as a manager, for you to be spending some time creating a communication, sharing it, presumably you have an expectation of action.
Well, but that's really interesting because I think, from our discussion, I think I've got the why and the what. That's all right. That's very straightforward.
Yeah.
The how a bit, the what, it probably not at all. But am I alone in that? So, maybe those are the sins of communication.
And therein lies the problem, James. That's how I think most people will relate to this, whether it's communication, training, change. They will look at it and say, I'm really clear on why, I'm really clear on what. And it starts to peter away. And that's why so much communication doesn't fully land. And that's the beauty of this model. And it forces you to do the third and fourth parts of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about helping your learner, your reader, the receiver of your communication to engage with your communication and for you to go work through the discipline. So a resource for all of us to be able to work through each stage and answer the questions. And if you can't, well, maybe something's missing, actually. So it might push you further back around the model to think a bit more carefully about your intention or what you're trying to communicate. I'm a massive advocate. I can't take credit for it, but I'm definitely can speak for using it as a discipline for creating.
Very good.
So James, now your book's going to be even better than it was
It's
before.
even bloody longer. Yeah. But if anybody's interested and wants, to send me 20 quid as a down payment.
20?
I'll back.
James,
that's fine. Limited edition.
Let's not go too far. Let's just start by reading Managed by Morons, James's best-selling first book. And then you'll want to read his second book after you've read that and listened to this podcast.
For sure.
See, that's how you do an advert, James. Come on.
Screwed it up. Self-promotion. Not my strong point. Lovely. Thank you very much. I shall take all that to heart and go and start writing some more.
Well, thanks for that, Amanda. I think that was really useful.
Pleasure.
We applied it to James's book. But you could see how in all sorts of scenarios, communication situations, managers will be able to use your model every day. So thank you for joining us and sharing that.
Pleasure to see you. Thank you.
Here's to the next 30 years.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later.
We cover a whole host of topics on this podcast,
From purpose to corporate jargon.
but always focused on one thing: getting the job done well.
Easier said than done. So if you've got unhappy customers or employees, bosses or regulators breathing down your neck,
If your backlogs are out of control and your costs are spiraling, and that big IT transformation project that you've been promised just keeps failing to deliver,
we can help. If you need to improve your performance, your team's performance, or your organisation's, get in touch at jimmy@ajobdonewell.com.
or James@jobdonewell.com.